What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. So welcome back to what is probably my favorite series and really something that I honestly just love making because it's not only is it one of the more fun series to actually make on my channel, but it's probably one of the more unique and personally I believe interesting as well. So here we go, we're taking a look at another compilation of some of just the coolest and craziest abilities that didn't make it into League of Legends. So I think I'm probably going to try and make maybe one or two of these per month now. It's a little bit tough because finding the right abilities is pretty challenging. It does take a lot of research, but this is the second one this month, so hopefully that's not too many for you guys, and I hope you enjoy. And if you liked the video, definitely hit that like button, and let's get started. So first up, we're showing off an ability that was once tested out for Ao Shin and of course Aurelion Sol later on, which was permanent flight. So in his development, the idea was that it would either be maybe like a passive ability or like a toggle effect that would let him just glide around and essentially just ignore terrain completely at will. The problem was that going over walls is an incredibly powerful mechanic, and it was already so strong, and so having a character that can both ignore walls and also just see over them all the time is something that Riot described would be worth around 80% of the character's power budget. And if you don't know, the way they design champions is like, champions are only allowed to be so powerful, and as a result, certain amounts of power are placed in certain amounts of abilities, and as a result, he would have to fit the remaining 20% of his power budget in the rest of his abilities, which would have just been horrible, to be honest. We kind of got a lightweight version of this ability in Aurelion Sol's current E, but it takes a lot of preparation. It can only be used in one direction at a time. You can't go over the same wall over and over and over again, and it's heavily balanced around that. So Riot Rabid Llama actually said that some kind of pure support champion might actually be able to pull off this ability in a fair way. Maybe someone who's like a spotter champion who flies around the map to call things out for their team or something like that. That character would end up being even more niche than Bard though, and probably wouldn't be able to help out their team that much with their other abilities in order to balance out that permanent flight effect, so it's probably not that likely to be created in the future. Next up, we have an ability that was described by a question that Riot Ezreal was asked about percent chance effects. The idea was an ability that when you did a certain thing, you'd have a percent chance of triggering an ability. So for example, it was compared to something like Spirit Breaker's Bash in Dota. So Ezreal was actually the designer for Caitlyn, and he said that Caitlyn was originally planned to have a percent chance effect. They ended up removing the percent chance effect because introducing RNG elements to the game is something they just didn't want to do, and as a result they replaced it with her passive that she has now, and Riot really wanted to use RNG effects as little as possible, to be honest, and you can definitely see that when they remove the dodge mechanic. And they've also been systematically removing or really changing abilities that have a lot of RNG involved with them, so it's pretty unlikely that we'll see any ability like this again. I mean, the game already still has Critical Strike, which is a pretty significant part of the AD carry role in League, and really just a bunch of other champions as well, but Critical Strikes are designed a little bit differently, and have much different design tropes in general, and overall they're not nearly as bad as some of the other RNG elements that previously existed. Next up, we have an ability that was originally planned for Veigar during his Season 4 rework, and we found out about this one from Smash Gizmo's Q&A a while back on stream, and it essentially worked by resetting Veigar's Meteor whenever he used them inside of an Event Horizon. So it kind of turned Event Horizon into like this super telegraph minigame where you had maybe a limited amount of space and his W cooldown was just super short, and if you were stuck inside of it, you had to just dodge everything like crazy. And this was back when the Event Horizon was being changed to have like a really long delay on the actual activation. And essentially the idea was that since Veigar is kind of like this cartoon villain sort of character, it actually fits in really well thematically, since cartoon villains are kind of the characters that like to make totally ridiculous things happen that are just super easy to dodge, but if you actually do get hit by it, it just totally wrecks you. Unfortunately though, because of the nature of the tight space and the delay on the Meteor, it just meant that it was good for only two things really: clearing minion waves where you just can't miss, and killing tanks as well, since the Meteors did tons of damage, and tanks have bigger hitboxes, so they're a lot easier to hit. But we all know how much Riot loves their minigames, but this one wasn't going to be viable to balance, so it ended up getting scrapped. Next up, we have an ability from Riot Ezreal that was considered on a character that never actually made it into League of Legends, but we found out about it when he was asked about Udyr, and why his Tiger Stance didn't proc on hit effects on every hit, and Ezreal replied saying that proccing multiple on-hit effects on one attack was really overpowered, and Udyr also had 2 attack speed steroids in his kit, and as a result, he just couldn't proc on-hit effects. But they also tested a character that would proc on hit effects twice at the same time, pretty consistently, like kind of like the old Devourer effect, but on an ability really. And it turned out that if they did, well, they definitely wouldn't be able to give an attack speed buff alongside it, and regardless, it was just super overpowered to have an ability that could proc multiple on hit effects at the same time, or to proc on hit effects twice at once. And essentially that character that had that ability actually ended up getting scrapped. I'm not entirely sure which character it was, but I'm pretty confident that they didn't make it into the game, probably because of their balance issues. Next up, we have something that's a pretty cool idea for an ability, but with a little bit of a disappointing answer as to why it didn't actually make it into the game from Riot. So the idea was for a champion with an ability that would remove debuffs as a skill. So it kind of worked as like Quicksilver Sash or like maybe Mikhail's Crucible that you could target on an ally, but something that would remove all debuffs, not just, certain types of them. And as an ability, it would pretty much only be used to counter other abilities, so it could be really valuable on a support champion actually, that you could use as like a counter pick or something like that, but would also be really niche and only useful as a counter effect, so it could actually be pretty balanced overall. And Riot said that they had tested and considered a similar type of ability in the past, but they decided that essentially it would just be too much work to go through all the abilities in the game to make sure that they just wouldn't screw up when using it with the new spell. Unfortunately, that's kind of a bummer. It means that the ability just didn't make it into the game because of technical reasons. I mean, I guess technical reasons like that do have to be considered, but if the game wasn't made from fresh Italian spaghetti, then spells probably would be categorized in a way that wouldn't be that big of a deal. This one's a little unfortunate as to why it didn't make it in, but still pretty cool to see for sure. Another ability that we're maybe a little bit bummed out, or perhaps glad to see wasn't put in the game though, was a version of Orianna's ultimate during her development, where she would actually cause her ball to latch on to an enemy instead of an ally. The rest of Orianna's kit would work pretty much the same way, so you'd be able to cast the rest of your kit and just wreck the enemy team without them being able to do too much about it. And the only thing stopping this ability being stupidly broken is that it was on her ultimate, to be fair. Maybe it honestly wasn't even that good actually, because she wouldn't be able to attach her ball to an enemy and then shockwave the enemy team, because shockwave wouldn't exist on her kit. She had actually the exact same Q, W, and E, just without shockwave. So maybe this version of her ultimate wasn't actually that powerful at all. But if attaching her ball to an enemy was an option on her E though, oh man, that would be super busted. So the next ability that we're taking a look at comes from an idea on the Riot forums asking if Riot would ever consider a sleep mechanic on a champion as like a new form of crowd control, with the idea that it would maybe be like a long duration crowd control effect, but like it gets interrupted if the target that's asleep takes any damage. And Riot Ezreal responded to this, and he exclaimed that they actually had considered and tested a sleep version of an ability before, but they ended up deciding not to add it into the game because it actually kind of causes a lot of frustration in teams. For example, if you manage to sleep someone who's a really powerful carry on the enemy team, and then someone on your team accidentally wakes them up. That creates a pretty annoying and really counterintuitive, and to be honest, toxic sort of gameplay situation. Maybe it could work in some redesigned version though. I mean, Overwatch has recently introduced a sleep mechanic on one of their newer heroes, Ana, and overall it's working out quite well in that game. Maybe there's a new way to design it, but Riot Ezreal, as well as the rest of the Riot team, decided that the sleep mechanic, or at least that version of a sleep mechanic, is something that probably shouldn't make it into the game. Our next scrapped ability for today that didn't actually make it into League of Legends was an ability that was given out as an example during one of Riot's presentations, titled Designers Are Human, in the Too Awesome to Cut section. So it's kind of like a slideshow presentation where they explained a lot of the characteristics of designers and what makes a good champion designer at Riot. It was sort of like a presentation that they gave to interns actually. And it turns out that Riot spent a month, maybe more, tweaking an ultimate ability that would have given Shaco permanent stealth. Kind of like a Kali's smoke bomb sort of is what they described it as, but forever. It was permanent. Permanent stealth is a mechanic that would have potentially been kind of cool, and gating it behind level 6 might have worked if they had like the worst early game imaginable, or if it was like super telegraphed and not really all that stealthy. But in reality, it was just impossible to balance, which it seems that Riot eventually found out after that 1 month or more period went by, and as a result, the ability got scrapped. And that just about wraps up our compilation for some of the coolest, or what I thought were the coolest abilities that didn't make it into League of Legends. You know, it's always a ton of fun to make these, and maybe see some suggestions or just responses, reactions to some of the abilities that could have made it into League. So definitely leave us some comments below on what you thought about the abilities, and looks like that's gonna be it for me. If you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like, subscribe if you want. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.